Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Let Me Talk. Yay!
Yes, guys.
It's been officially... How long has it been, Callum?
It's been a long time.
It's been
a
1
very
year.
long time.
1 year of the show.
We're back for our second year, guys, and we can't wait. We've got a brilliant guest for you this evening, Barry Will. Would you like to sort of just start us off by saying like what you're doing at the moment and how you're doing, and just sort of give us a little rundown?
Yeah, of course. I didn't realise I'm the first guest on after a year hiatus. What an honour. But yeah, no, I'm so now currently after everyone left for summer and you've come back, and I am now officially the president of the student union.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a lot actually. There's a lot of different things. A lot of different things going on just now with the union, with the university, with, oh my God, I've come in and I basically came in with this mantra of I'm going to try and find out everything I can. And as I've started to find things out.
Expose all the secrets.
Yeah, as I've started to find things out. Not so much secrets, things that people hadn't really thought of that are going to define my year that we can touch on later. Yeah. But like, it is so much information has that you've got to learn coming into this job, you know, because you're advocating on like a million different issues. And you kind of need to be an expert on all of those issues. Yeah. But it has been great so far. Like, we've got such a fantastic team of sabbatical officers. And yeah, I'm really excited for the next few months coming up.
Yeah. So you're 27, if I'm right.
Yeah.
I got that. So how long have you been sort of like in uni for, sort of in this sort of space?
I've been in St Andrews for 4 years. Mm-hmm. So for the last 4 years. And then I also, when I first left school, I went and studied architecture for a few years. Oh, wow. Although that is a 7-year degree. And I tapped
crazy, isn't it?
out of that. Yeah, I tapped out of that like 2 and a bit years in. As did most people who studied it. So then I went and I went traveling for a while, and I went and lived abroad for a little while. And I lived in Cambodia and in China. And so then, by the time I then came back to university, I was 23, so now 27.
So how did the, I'm going to say story, but how did you get from starting university to then getting interested in the sort of like student housing situation and then C.A.S.H, if that makes sense?
C.A.S.H was a funny one, like my story with C.A.S.H, because I started in it. I hadn't actually heard of it. I don't know, like my dad is a trade unionist, and he has been like,
Can you explain what a trade unionist is for some people that might not know?
Yeah, so if you're in a trade union, it's like all the workers who are striking just now. So you're in a union, a workplace union. And it kind of operates in the same way as the union here. Like, it's the same principle. It's a membership. And then there's through the power of the members, you can advocate as like a block. And so usually it's in workplaces. And my dad has always been a trade unionist. Like, he, I don't know if it's to be proud of or not proud of, but he like led the most violent workers' strike since the miners. In Dundee, and he got arrested and things for it, and actually put in jail for a little while, because there was some awful things going on in his workplace, and he's just always been a man. Like the very first book that he ever told me to read, and God knows what age I was The Ragged Trousered Philanthropists, which was all about like working class solidarity and working class people. So I guess I always had that in me.
Yeah.
And then I came to St Andrews, obviously saw the housing market, was a bit detached from it, to be honest, because I was working so much all the time. Like, I was always worked when I was at St Andrews. And I always worked pretty unreasonable hours. So it was just, there's just not time to get involved in advocacy and things.
So was it like a specific moment or like one major event that like sort of sparked that?
It was, yeah. It was one of my best friends then became director, and so she started to speak to me about it, and I was already like I was in the middle of having
director
to move
of
house. Yeah,
right.
My friend Lily, and I was in the middle of, I knew I was about to have to move house because my rent was being increased. This was before like the rent freeze, and and I knew it was about to become unaffordable for me, even though I was working, like I was getting up at 5 a.m. to get to Morrison's to do this, shift and work several times a week and then try and balance uni with it. And it was actually genuinely a lot. And like I was kind of at my max, and yet my rent was going up even more. And I was about to move out of a house with like my best friends. So, yeah, it kind of spurred me in, and I guess the rest is history. Then, as soon as I got in, I got so passionate about it, and I started to learn everything I could about housing. And then I realised, wow, this is actually such a unique situation in St Andrews compared to the rest of there's housing crisis in lots of places, but this is a very unique one. Yeah, I just threw everything I've got at.
And C.A.S.H, for the audience, which is the Campaign for Affordable Student Housing, could you explain to the audience how that differs from, let's say, your normal accommodation, it's not society, accommodation sort of...
The subcommittee.
Subcommittee, there you go. With the union, how would C.A.S.H differ from that?
I think C.A.S.H is a good example of what's called outside power. I think to be effective in things, you need inside power and you need outside power, and that's the kind of transition that I've gone on with going into president. Inside power is when you've already got good relationships with the people that you're trying to hold accountable, and you work with them. And sometimes those relationships aren't productive, but there always needs to be someone on the inside who can translate the frustration of people. And translate it, convince the people in power to say, look what's going on out there. These people are angry. Here's what you need to do. Outside power, I think that's what C.A.S.H was effective at, is it gave all these people who didn't really have a voice and let them exercise that through protest and through action and through helping the community as well, but through sharing stories about housing. I really built a community around it. So I think C.A.S.H is like the outside part of it. It's all under the same objective, I would argue. But C.A.S.H was a lot more... C.A.S.H was the accommodation subcommittee with a megaphone.
Yes.
I guess.
And you guys held with C.A.S.H, you guys had protests throughout town. I remember you had a few of those, and you had sit-ins, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us, because I remember that really, I mean, I've been here since September 2020, but I really felt that it really took off, I would say, in the last academic year. Like, maybe not necessarily take off, but really reach new heights.
As in C.A.S.H?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think when I took over.
Yes.
And I definitely came in with a different perspective on how we should run the campaign. And it proved very successful. Like people really liked it, and it's put me in a very good stead now. The voice that C.A.S.H sort of promoted everywhere, all the stuff that we did, from the protests and sharing experiences, the sit-in, which was one of my favourites, just to actually be part of, and to zip open your tent and be in the quad. Like that was a bit of a trip. But I think the most special thing actually about C.A.S.H that when I'm sort of thinking about it now is I realised, because most of these people have graduated, a lot of people who I did these things with, just how many people came round and banded together, people that I never knew before, that became my best friends, and we all did this stuff because we cared about housing, and we wanted to make noise about it. And yeah.
Well, I know you sort of said earlier that St Andrews is a very unique place in terms of like the housing crisis that's going on. How exactly is it unique? Like how would you elaborate on that?
I think so. Like Freeman St Andrews is a small town, a small medieval conservation area town. So already there's limits on what can be built, on how students can expand. Add into that a mix of very low income locals. St Andrews has the highest rate of child poverty of any town in Northeast Fife. And so you also have this almost like dystopia of like some of the richest residents in Scotland, which St Andrews has the most expensive street in Scotland, the Scores. On the flip side of that, you have like real poverty in the town within the local population. And then you add into the mix of that, within this tiny little town, there's a massive university that contributes a lot of pressure and has grown a lot. There's locals who can't afford to live here anymore, local families that have been torn up. There is a HMO ban. It is also the home of golf. Like, It is the literal home of golf, which means we get in these busloads of tourists all the time. And all of these different things, like in a normal housing market that goes with supply and demand, there are so many different pressures and aspects to the St Andrews housing market that just make it so almost like obscene. It's just there is no place really on earth that in such a small area there is such different pressures and demands on housing and so many different people like vying for their place. And I think that's what makes it so interesting is that there's a lot of opportunity to fix it. There's a lot of things to explore. There's a lot of social issues that come out of reading into some of this stuff. When you start to unpack it, you start to realize just how like imbalanced like the housing market is in St Andrews, and just it's pretty wild.
And how do you? Because and this is a very simplified way of how I explained it to some of my family, especially my Belgian family who have never been here before. I was sort of explaining that there's different populations in town, with the student population being the biggest, and then you'd have the local population, and then I'd say like tourist population, which is a very simplified way of looking at it. But do you think that there's a way of, especially when it comes to finding housing, of these groups coexisting, especially as the student population is getting higher?
Yeah, I do, but I think that needs to come alongside the student population not getting higher. Like there's and that comes alongside short-term lets and Airbnbs not being allowed to expand. There's limits on the different things that you've mentioned, or the different demographics, I guess, that make up our housing market, that can mean that we can live together pretty fine. There's not going to be animosity between different groups. Not that there ever should be, because it's not the groups at fault that have contributed to this. It's lack of policy. It's the university in some ways. It's lots of different things. But I think there is a future where everyone who wants to live in St Andrews can live in St Andrews. But to do that, we need like actual policy that is going to limit some of the problems we're seeing.
How do the rent prices for students compare to the rest of the universities around Scotland or even the UK?
St Andrews has, this was in a report by Protect Your Bubble, which is online. I think it was from 2022. But it's very hard to get like accurate data on this stuff, in real time. St Andrews had the most expensive halls of residence of any UK university outside of London. That did include catering, and there's quite a lot of catering in St Andrews, but our catering is also obscenely expensive. Like it's £12 a day. I don't spend £12 a day on food. And people are forced into that contract. They don't really get a choice. And so St Andrews is difficult to match it up nationally, but at least the data that we do have that does that, or attempts to do that, it paints St Andrews as being one of the most expensive places in the UK. And it has got worse, because St Andrews also, the last summer that we've seen, rent has just skyrocketed.
Why? Why is it skyrocketed? What are the factors?
I think so the context of that is St Andrews already has the landlord yield which is the amount of profit that like a landlord can get off renting their property, like the percentage that they make in profit. St Andrews has 3 times higher than what the average is across the UK. As a percentage, like that is obscene. St Andrews is already massive profiting area for renting, but oh wait, sorry, that's my train of thought.
That's all right.
It's like 10 o'clock at night, and I'm like,
no, that's fair. Thank you, Star, for the late slot.
I mean, I was wanting to ask you a little bit about HMOs, because this is sort of a term that we hear like being like thrown around a lot. Do you want to maybe sort of just clarify what a HMO is?
And its effects on the population and housing?
Because I know there is a lot of like spare rooms sort of like under lock and key in St Andrews because of HMO. I mean, that's what I've heard. Mm-hmm. If you're able to maybe kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. HMOs are houses of multiple occupancy. So it's like a licensing scheme that's introduced by local councils to any property that has 3 or more people living in it that are unrelated. So virtually every student property that's 3 bedrooms is going to need a HMO. The HMO ban thing it was allowed by the Scottish Government to be introduced in local areas where they think there was too much expansion of HMOs. So it was introduced in St Andrews. I mean, the ban has been in some form for like over 10 years, so like a long time. It's only really got, for those initial first years, it was just in like the conservation area of St Andrews, like North Street, South Street. But that's now grown, and it now encompasses the entire town. And basically it limits anyone applying for a new licence, which means that because it's been in place for a good few years now, like in that capacity, that landlords now, new landlords coming to the market, if a house sells and someone buys it and wants to rent it, new landlords can't apply for another licence. And so houses that are showing up on the market, landlords are limited by Fife Council's policy to actually rent it to students.
Well, it seems almost like logical that they should be able to. I mean, considering there's a housing crisis. So why isn't that the case? Why can't we just, like, why can't there be sort of an appeal and maybe like a loophole or a way around this ban that's clearly like hindering students' ability to live in St Andrews?
The reason it was imposed, though, is because Fife Council believe that that this will help the local population get houses.
Right.
So but the thing is, the data doesn't tell us this. Like, we've had data for a long time, and every year the student population increases and the local population decreases. St Andrews, the way I sort of see it, and the way Fife Council refused to see it, like they never listened to this argument. But the local population in St Andrews is reducing. Like, I'm from Dundee. I know plenty of people who grew up in St Andrews. No one wants to grow up and live for the rest of their life in St Andrews because it's a small town. Like, it's a beautiful town. Yeah, we come here to study for 4 years. That's amazing. But like, if you're a local who went to Madras and you've spent 18 years of your life here,
you want to leave.
You want to leave, yeah. And if you do want to stay, then what is here for you? Like, what, to go and work in a hotel on minimum wage for the rest of your life? Or the industry is all hospitality in St Andrews. And that's a reality that Fife Council need to face. There isn't young local families who grew up here wanting to live here as it is, and that contributes to the decline in the local population. And so, that's what I think is happening here. There is obviously a factor that, the growth in student population is making it unaffordable for people to live in St Andrews. But that can be resolved by having things like rent controls. Like, Fife Council can impose that in the area. They can make it a rent-pressured zone. They don't need to be targeting specific demographics when it's not their fault, and it just causes problems for everyone. Landlords, instead of doing HMO, they just go to short-term lets.
Yeah. If there is such a big housing crisis, why are St Andrews, like you're saying, letting in more students?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like, that's one that I've been like looking into now, and it's actually more complicated than you would think.
Is it because of COVID?
COVID was one of them, and next year we'll actually see the phase out of that COVID cohort. Right, okay. So because that we had that big bulk of numbers, and that's contributed for 4 years each year.
That's me.
That's me as well, to be fair.
Yeah. So you guys caused the housing crisis.
Thank God! At least I'm recognised for something.
But like that number that we let in, which wasn't the university's fault necessarily. Like, there was some things that they did with postgrads at the time that definitely were their fault, and they should take accountability. But the COVID entrance contributed to an increase in numbers. The university is wanting to say that we're going to settle out at 10,000. I think just now we're at 10,400, 10,300, something around there. But the university, from what I can see on the inside, they've built this algorithm. They have massively reduced offers that they're giving out. Really? The thing is, though, St Andrews then got named number one last 2 years ago, and so last year they massively reduced the offers by thousands, and then suddenly lots of people firmly accepted their place, and they hadn't anticipated that. It's like a kind of imbalance. You kind of guess what people are going to do, and you use a trend, but the thing is, St Andrews suddenly being named number one in The Guardian, like in 2022 or something, that changed the game, because suddenly everyone's like, yes, I want to go to the number one uni, and the model couldn't have anticipated that. I think we're going to see the same again, and this is why I'm having conversations with the uni, because now St Andrews is about to be on the biggest TV show in the world, in The Crown, and that will drive many more people to be like, I want to live there, I want to go there, and the model needs to take that into account.
Do you think this increase in exposure to St Andrews will mean that there'll be less domestic students accepted in, so students from Scotland. Because I already know it's a relatively, I mean, I'm guessing here, but I'm guessing it's a relatively low number compared to international students, and obviously that's because domestic students don't pay a fee.
Yeah.
Do you think that the domestic population in St Andrews, student population, will have to decrease, or is there like a rule in place where there's like a specific number that we have to keep in the university, or is that going to be sort of in danger?
There is quotas for domestic students, and specifically quotas for domestic students from like low incomes or disadvantaged backgrounds. And so there is things like the university is held to account in some way to it. Like they quite often, most Scottish universities, do end up, at least the big ones, break those limits and they have to pay fees. But that kind of is the way that we're going. Although what the big thing that I've learned coming into this job is that, like, I think that the housing crisis is tied into that issue of Scottish students coming to university, because the Scottish government, as I found out, actually, you see when you say, oh, we get free tuition, like, Tom, where are you from?
I pay international fees.
You pay international fees. Okay, I'm so sorry.
Although I am I know the audience can hear this, but I'm a British citizen as well. But I don't qualify, and I'm also European. I'm European and British citizen.
Oh my god, that burns even more. I'll reiterate, I'm so sorry. But
it's all your fault.
I'm on it. But like, as a Scottish person, we don't pay tuition fees, right? We get the Scottish government says, we free education for everyone. It costs.
Is there both like pros and cons to that?
Yeah, massive.
Right.
It's like literally decimating the sector and it's causing the housing crisis because universities, the Scottish government, so it costs St Andrews £12,000 to educate a student, but the Scottish government doesn't pay anywhere near that for Scottish students yet. So they make a loss on every Scottish student they admit. Even the UK government, so the £12,000, remember the UK government pays £9,250 to the university. So they're making like a almost £3,000 loss on every single UK student. So the only thing that they can do to stay in pace with like rises in inflation and energy costs and construction costs for growing the campus and all these different things, the funding model in Scotland basically says you need to grow in student numbers. You need to increase your international student population.
Yeah.
And in the last few years across Scotland, like we have seen massive increases in the international and postgraduate populations, which are driving housing crises in every single university, town and city. So it's all interlinked, like everything, all roads lead to Rome. And I'm starting to see like all the roads are leading to Scottish government specifically. Like if you want to give us free tuition, you need to be funding our universities properly, because otherwise the consequences aren't just the universities, some of them going broke and not being able to pay their staff, but they have very real social impacts for our university towns like St Andrews. The growth of St Andrews is having real harm on the local residents. And so, yeah, I think back to your point about domestic students, because I think it's important to frame it within that. If we continue on this path, then yeah, like Scottish students aren't going to be able to afford to come here, especially the C.A.S.H, the loans that we get. St Andrews and very many university cities and towns are rapidly becoming unaffordable for Scottish students. And I think something needs to be done.
So I'm sure you've probably thought of this before, and it's a very complicated issue. But what are the choices for a solution?
For a solution to what I just said,
yes.
The last thing, the Scottish government needs to fund universities.
Right.
Like it's as simple as that. The Scottish government and the UK government, like in 2003, I think it was, if I remember off my head, like it used to be funding for universities was 75% funded from government and 25% from tuition fees. That's now flipped. So it's now 75% from tuition fees and 25% from government. So the government's just kind of sat back and been like, you know what, we'll let this happen, We know universities are going to absorb we can spend this money in some other way.
Yeah.
But we're now at a point where it has reached like a crisis,
Yeah.
where there's housing crisis, where there's a cost of living crisis, and universities now can't help their students because they don't have discretionary funding, where they can't afford to pay their staff, and their staff have been striking for like 10 years, where universities like Bristol have just like made redundancies of entire departments because they can't afford the things anymore. And so the solution comes back to government. Like if government does as they say, and they respect higher education and they respect the sector, then they should be investing in it, because this isn't a thing for this. We don't do this for profit. Our lecturers aren't out here for profit.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't allow our institutions to, their only resort is to turn to profit so they can continue to grow and to invest and develop. Like I don't think that's right. I think, as other European countries do, government should be centrally funded from government and majority.
What can the university itself do? What resources do the university have to assist in the student housing crisis, if anything?
In the housing crisis, they've got this massive lobbying power. It's always like, I'm like, why are you not saying something? Because if you say something, right, you're the biggest employer in Fife. So all the people that you employ, like, you have enormous weight to the statements that you say. Not only that, you're number one university in the UK, number one in Scotland for God knows how many years, right? All these things that they want to chat about themselves. Third oldest university in the UK. And yet, when I've said to them, make a statement on housing, I used to say it in C.A.S.H, and they're like, no, we can't, we're not going to get involved in this. And it's something that really does frustrate me.
Why do you think they won't give a statement?
Because they don't want to messy the waters. Like, the university has, like, I kind of work pretty well with the university now. Like, I came in and they saw, like, I'm just a guy who's like out here trying to fix things, and I will find out what I'm trying to find out. I will push the buttons and make sure. And they've been receptive to that. Like, and they've kind of given me what I wanted, so I can like understand more about it and figure out how we're going to fix it together. But the university have this thing of, right, we're not going to like dip our toe in that water. Like, the private housing market is the private housing market. They kind of see it as like they're doing their own thing. So they're building Albany Park, they're building Gapsite, they're building these other developments. And so they think they're fixing it on their end, right? They only think they're responsible for.
So it's both an issue of university and private housing.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's an issue. It depends where you sit on the fence, I guess. It depends how much money you've got, probably. But for me, like, the housing crisis is an issue of both parts. Our halls are far too expensive.
Yeah.
Our private housing market is absolutely insane. Like, it is far too expensive. There's far too many issues, like the HMO ban, short-term lets, all these different pressures causing it. And I think the university has lobbying power, though, to like actually campaign Fife Council to say, no, you shouldn't. Like, stand up. Like, you shouldn't have a HMO ban, or you need to take action on short-term lets, because the university it calls itself a guardian of this town. But these things are impacting the locals as well. And the university has a responsibility here. I think, they stand up when there's these big issues across the world and across the globe. And, they make statements on what they think is right and what is wrong. Yet, for something as local as like housing 3 streets from College Gate, where the principal works, they keep their mouth closed and they don't say a word. Yet things are spiraling out of control so fast that, like, I think the university does have some lobbying power here. They don't make the decisions. That's important to frame. Like, they're not up there in Fife Council getting to dictate what they do. Like, Fife Council is its own department, its own central government, like local government. And sometimes they don't listen to the university. But the university needs to be advocating for students right now, and they need to be communicating like that they understand students are going through this and they're trying to fix it for them. Like, at the very least, that's what students expect.
Yeah. What are you yourself currently working on in terms of this whole situation, and what are the next steps in the short term for everyone in St Andrews to kind of know and work on?
Yeah. So, like, the next steps for me are definitely one thing that I found out coming into this is all these different parties, no one really has any data. And so I want to collect that data. I want to do a massive accommodation survey, run it over the next while, and then can use that to inform so many different things. We need to understand because it's fair enough cash to like sit here and say, is rent is too expensive. But unless we get the data across the entire student population, or at least a majority of it, where we can say, this is a serious problem, that says rent is too expensive for me. This is the impacts that it causes. This is the type of housing that I'm looking for. I don't want ensuite. I want standard. Or, we need this data to then be able to advocate. And currently we don't have it. All I know essentially when I go into these spaces is people are really unhappy with housing right now. Almost everyone says it's too expensive, but you can't, when you take that to the university, they're like, okay, well, what do they want? Like, if we're building new developments, like what do they want from it instead? Is it just cost, or is it people want ensuite, but they want to pay less for it? Like there's different moving parts that we need to understand. So I want to do that over the next few months, collect all that with the SAB team. And then, really, what I want is the university to reduce the cost of halls of residence. I think they're far too expensive. I don't think there's a reasonable justification for them to be as expensive as they are. I've spoken with plenty of other universities that have similar housing stock, and they are not as expensive. We've also had rent increase on rent increase on rent increase. Other universities haven't done that. And so I want a good reason to that. And so we're pushing the university on that. With the other things, now is the time to get that data. That's why the data is important, because for the local estate agents, you've now got to, they can basically just sit back and keep putting up rent, and no one can do anything about it. Unless they put it up 300%, you just kind of have to accept it because they own the property. And so what we want to do is build the stories of this is how much harm is actually contributing to our community. The estate agents who run the businesses in town, they live here, they grew up here, the staff live here. It's about time that they understand just how much an impact that their decisions to unreasonably increase rent are actually having on a community. But to do that, we need to collect those stories. So that's what I'm wanting to do over the next while, and then really just take that to everyone in power. I've already spoken with 5 councils, spoken with the government on these issues, spoken with the university, and everyone's kind of receptive to listening what's going to come out of this, and the people in power, it's quite an exciting time, because the people in power, I think also because of my election, turns out there's a lot of people in different spaces already talking about, because it was making a lot of noise. So I think me being elected in, there was this one guy who's a councillor for the area. And I was speaking to him about it, and he was like, "Oh, when we heard that you got elected, everyone in 5 sat up a bit straighter in their seat."
If I don't mean to interrupt you, but if I may point out to the audience, when the elections happened in May, and this is Barry won by over 1,000 votes.
Yeah.
Just so it's clear, what Barry's the impact of Barry's election is. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's what I did. It's not about me. Coming into this role, it's not about me who I am as a person. It's about what I stood for and what my history was. I think that's what people then getting really behind that showed everyone who's in power, that we actually need to be doing something about this now. And now there's someone who is in a position of power who we have to speak to, who's going to unrelentlessly fight for it. So there is that. I didn't expect the university to want to listen as much. But even in the university,
you feel like they're listening to you more now that you've got this position.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say, I always saw the university as there's just this mega institution, right? But at every point of it is human beings, and most of them came through academia. I mean, Sally Mapstone used to be a trade union rep, like what my dad was.
Oh, wow. I knew she used to be a professor at university. I did not know she was a trade union rep.
She was a trade union rep at, I think, Oxford, yeah. So, all these people, they go home and they've got families and things. It's very easy, when, especially on C.A.S.H, I think some of the things, I would say in C.A.S.H, it was because you see the institution.
Yeah,
but,
you just see them as a symbol or an
yeah, right?
You
don't,
fair.
But then coming into these spaces, I think I give very convincing arguments of why things need to change. And when I've been given the space to give these arguments, and I've always endeavored to just always, always, always bring it back to community and like talk about the power of community and the value of it and why I think it's being lost and what we can do to fix it. And it just resonates with people. And I think, it's definitely the other SAB team as well. Like the other people in the SAB team were really good, I think, as a team of showing that we really care about St Andrews. And that we're not just here to scream and shout about things, but we genuinely care. And because of that, like I've honestly been like so surprised by how much all the people in power are actually willing to listen. Whether that means we get change, we'll find out. Like I'm going to keep pushing for it, and everyone will get to find out as these projects all expand and grow and develop. But I would honestly say that I'm surprised by the university, but I think they haven't heard these arguments before. Like they haven't had a president recently come in and be like have you tell them about the story of their neighbor whose family, everyone in his family's moved out because they can't afford to live here. Like they've not heard these stories before, but when they hear them, they sit and they listen and they're like, they really take it in. And I think C.A.S.H gave an opportunity for people to just say, oh, they're just this. For in the university, literally, I've seen emails where they're just like, ignore them. They're just this camping group. And people did. But now that they've put a face to it, and now they see that actually it's someone who genuinely cares, like it does seem to be working better. But, I told them in university court, I was like, I'm happy with this, but like, I'm still going to keep the fire under your feet. Like, this is not... Like there's things that you need to do to fix this.
They can't ignore you now. That's the thing. It's you're now the representative and of the student body. It's and I don't mean to just put that as necessary pressure for you, but I think also from the university side, we've elected you, so it's very much a representation of our voice that you're here, and I think partially, and this is a bit my opinion, but they can't ignore that. And if they ignore that, they ignore the will of the students and they ignore their own students by ignoring you.
I agree, yeah. I agree. But, it's not like they've ignored presidents before. Like, this is the I'm not sure under Sally Mapstone, but, like, definitely under previous principals. Like, it's easy. Other in universities as well literally just shut out presidents. And so that was a bit of a risk. I was like, oh, my God, what's going to happen?
And do you think it's different with you? Do you think they're listening to you?
Yeah. Like I also have my wits about me. Like as I say, my dad's a trade unionist. Like, I've done a lot of different stuff in these spaces before. Like, I've worked with people in power, and I've worked with people I don't like who are in power, who don't take things seriously and just chat absolute nonsense. And I like not that I like, but there's definitely opportunity here for us to get some wins. Like the university is definitely like willing to like sort of work with us.
What are those wins? Like say like there's like a 5-year plan. What would be like the perfect situation in 5 years? What would you be really happy to see St Andrews be like in 5 years?
In 5 years?
Is that too short a time?
No, I don't think so. No, that definitely shouldn't be. Because a lot of the things that they could do could happen within the year. For example, reducing the rent in halls of residence. A lot of these things, like, if you're going to drastically reduce the rent, then you need to change the funding model. You need to change. You need to get into this. It
has to be done gradually.
Yeah, it has to be done gradually. This is why it takes into account like government funding. This is why we're going to be launching a campaign on that, because we can't tell the university you need to take down a massive portion of your income when you actually don't have as much income as most people think. Like, universities are pretty skint. St Andrews is not completely skint, but like it has a lot less money than you would ever think. And so you can say to them, like, if I was to come in, I wouldn't be effective if I tell them, right, reduce your rent, but at the same time, I'm not going to advocate for the changes in the funding structure to make sure that you can continue to be a sustainable university.
Yeah.
And so it's like lots of different moving parts. I think that's also why the university are listening, because before people would just come and say, no, reduce the rent. But now that we've looked into everything and we can see the university is now working with us, so they're giving us all the data they have on the funding cuts across Scotland. Sally Mapson's like president of the Universities UK, so kind of good position to get all that really key data to build a campaign around that normally you don't get. So the university is so like a sort of give and take. You know, it's like you're giving us this, but like if I'm getting this, then I'm sure as hell going to advocate for reduced rent.
So the most important thing is to sort of work together and try and make sure it benefits everyone.
Yeah, but of those key things that I think that you were saying, I guess it depends if the question is directed to the university or to kind of the housing market in general.
I think it's an interesting one. You said both are issues. Are both separate issues or are they combined?
They're kind of both separate issues. Because like what
and which one takes priority? Which one is more important? Or are they both?
That's a good question. I don't think there is one that is like we have 40% of our students live in halls of residence, so it's kind of half and half. You know what I mean? Like you can't effectively advocate for one, and if you do, you're leaving out the other half. And
which is more likely to improve, though?
I think more likely to improve.
You can speak to the like you're saying you've got this genuine connection with the university now.
Yeah.
How does that compare to? I mean, the crisis that's out with the university's control, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think the uni one's going to be easier. Like because I meet with them every day. Like I've got to have different meetings across all different things, and it's good ways to like bring in these issues. But I don't meet Fife Council every day. Like, you know, you've got to bargain for a meeting with them guys. My God, I don't know what the hell they do in that office in Glenrothes, but sure hell is not, you know, being snappy with their emails. But so that's going to be bigger, and it's such a wider thing, right? Because like the private housing market is influenced by national policy, like across all of Scotland. Things like the rent freeze, these have impacts, but that took Living Rent, one of the members organisations that I'm part of, a tenants union, that took them like years and years and years of campaigning and advocating and building that information base that you can then use to convince the people in power. That's what we're trying to do this year. And so it's going to be a lot harder. And like, hopefully we can take that anger, and we can take the frustration, we can take the data that we get to really influence the national conversation. That's my kind of plan. Or just speaking to like MPs and being lucky to be president of St Andrews because it gets those connections. But that is a much harder challenge to fight, and we need other student unions across Scotland to really join us in it.
Well, I was sort of going to question you a little bit about that. So when you say we, do you have a sort of team of people around you? Or do you have sort of, I'm going to say society, but like-minded people that you can converse with and sort of tackle this issue together? Across the different issues, I do. Like, what I've been lucky is that over my time in housing, because I didn't just do like, you know, I think a lot of people saw C.A.S.H, but I was doing a lot of different things on housing across Scotland at the same time, and have been really fortunate, actually. Like, I realise how fortunate it is now coming into the position, because it's like there's so many different groups that I've managed to connect with who are just invaluable, like for brainstorming, for campaigning, for like sharing resources, for delegating tasks and things too. Not just within St Andrews, not just within the union, but like within Scotland in different campuses and different student unions. So when I say we, like I kind of use it as like an umbrella term, I guess. But there's groups. I mean, even with C.A.S.H, say for example, short-term lets. Like, I'm wanting to do work on short-term lets. I'm working with C.A.S.H to do that. That's one of the issues I'm working with, you know, the campaign that I used to run with. But when we're talking about student halls of residence, that's more working with the accommodation subcommittee and getting them and being able to work with them and working with some of the other sabbatical officers. The national stuff, like we're speaking to MPs and stuff just now, that's me working with my different contacts at different student unions, and we're getting together. So like when I say we, it's kind of, it's the networks that you build of sort of activism and things that are branching out, and why it's so important to network and so important to, you know, go to protests and meet people and speak to them, because you're going to rely on them someday. And why those protests from before were so valuable, because it built all these networks in town. So that's who I mean. Who I mean when I say we. It's a very vague we, but there's a whole bunch of very lovely people behind it.
And have me two final questions on housing, which actually these questions we could go on for 20 minutes, but we sadly only have 10 minutes left. I'll put them two in one, like trying to put them together. Yeah. What can students do if they're in a housing emergency, and how do we protect ourselves against a predatory landlord, or protect yourself against your landlord?
Just sort of like advice.
Yeah, advice. Yeah,
advice. Just to students listening.
Okay.
This is not good for my dad.
This isn't a personal struggle now. So I would say, if you're in a housing emergency, number one place to go is Shelter Scotland. Shelter Scotland is a housing charity. They do like phenomenal work, but they have an online website where kind of all the questions that you've got, like there's someone there to answer. They've got a free helpline. Honestly, the answer to your second question is also Shelter Scotland. Shelter Scotland is so good. Cash relied on it so much to get information. If like you're being cheated by a rogue landlord who's trying to like mess you over, there are things, very few people know them. Like, I mean, actually, you know what? I can't say the name now because I took an estate agent to court and we won.
Whoa.
And so, what's her name? Carol Davidson. Carol, if you're listening, Carol Davidson of Premier Let in St Andrews. Yeah, Carol Davidson. We won. We took her to court and we won.
Yeah, take that, Carol.
Yeah, take that, Carol. And so there's when you're being cheated, right? There are little known things about the law in Scotland, about housing law, that protect you. It's just too many people don't know about them. Like, if your landlord's increased your rent by what you think is unreasonable to market rates, there is a process that you can go through to appeal that. You can go to a rent officer, your local rent officer. Unfortunately, it does take a bit of work. Like, that's the thing. That's what puts people off, I think. And that's very fair that puts people off. Like, people are working God knows how many hours in, like, very low-paying jobs and everything just now. No one has the time. But if you do have the time, go to Shelter Scotland, and they can tell you all the advice that's there. I would also say then, if you want help, there's tenants' unions. There's living rent in Scotland, depending where you live. It's not as big in Scotland, in St Andrews, because it's more like a local population thing, and it just tends to be bigger in big cities and stuff. We did a lot of work with them here. It's one that I used to be a coordinator for them, and it's who we won the legal case with. And instead, St Andrews tends to be more like student housing campaigns and things, like people in power like me as president doing that sort of advocacy. But there's resources online. Number one, I would always say Shelter Scotland.
Okay.
And pretty much every question you've got could be answered by those guys.
I think that's incredible advice. Mm-hmm. That is very, very good advice. So anyone listening, Shelter Scotland, listen to what Barry's saying. And yeah, I always, I mean, it's been great talking to you, and I've expected a great answer for that, but it's like blown away. That's incredibly good advice that people should definitely heed. We've got about 5 minutes left, I'd say.
5 minutes.
5 minutes left. So now you're president.
Yeah.
I wish we would have time to talk about your presidency itself, but I don't think we'll have time to I know you've been there since July.
Yeah, since July.
I don't think we'll have time to necessarily talk about your presidency, but
I mean, you could sort of,
yeah.
You could sort of like, I mean, you did sort of talk about it at the beginning.
Yes.
You can,
You've linked it in, but
yeah, I was sort of like how your presidency has been able to grant you this sort of connection with the university that you never had before, on sort of like a personal level.
Yeah.
Which you found a lot more beneficial, especially once you put like a face to the people that you're trying to have these conversations with, or trying to make aware of the situation. I guess like how you were saying, it just makes it a lot more real.
Yeah.
Instead of sort of trying to fight this sort of like faceless like symbol of the university.
Yeah, what I would also say, like, is then you start to learn the personalities of these people. And this might sound like a bit Machiavellian, but is the way things work in this world, right? You start to learn who these people are, and then you're far more effective at negotiating with them because you know what their pressure points are. So, like, I know that, I'm not going to name names, but there's certain people in the uni that are going to listen to certain arguments because we've spent a little time now getting to know them, getting to know these people, working with them on issues. also while the students are gone, it means that like this job is all about negotiating, because like I literally have no power. Like think about it. Like I'm just in the uni. I can sit back and I can like march people around Market Street. But if the people who actually make the decisions don't respect my position enough and aren't convinced by my arguments enough to change, then it means nothing. And so that's the inside power that I started by talking about outside power in the start of the podcast. But like the inside power that I've now got is like translating that, to actual action. And so far, they seem to be listening.
Yeah. What is the end point for you? When do you step away from the presidency and say, listen, I've done all I can, I've done everything, I'm satisfied with what I have done? What does that sort of satisfaction look like to you? And just to sum up.
I mean, idealistically, yeah, it's a university where everyone who wants to study here can afford to study here, where they don't face unnecessary challenges because of their own personal circumstances, that they feel that the university and the union, like I ran for president of the union, they feel that the union represents them, that the union's here for them, it's here to advocate for them. That's the power of a strong student union. I think when people get to that place, and there is support, there's resources, or at least we're doing all, and I truly believe that we're doing all that we can in the face of big things that we're not in control of, like cost of living crisis, that we're doing all that we can to support our students, then yeah, that's when I take a step back. But that's I think that's a long time away.
Well, I wish you the very best of luck.
It's been fantastic.
It's been great talking to you. An absolute pleasure.
Chatting, yeah.
We covered a lot of points, and
I can't remember what that point was. See, my brain went dead. For the context, I've been in meetings since like 9 a.m. And when I was like, my brain went dead, I was thinking through this. I was like, what was the point again?
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's so late.
It's gone,
like,
it's gone.
We do appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I mean, I when I sent you the message, I was just like, I wouldn't be surprised if you went. Like I would, but I also need to go to sleep at some point.
I feel it's definitely
I also
been
have
like
a puppy now. Yeah,
yeah, you do. You have a
Shy
puppy
or
as well.
something.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely been one of our more like intense episodes. A lot of questioning, and like a lot of very very like serious matter as well. So I do appreciate the sort of mental capacity to be able to do this at such a late time. And yeah, we'd really appreciate you being here and sort of talking to us. So thank you very much, guys. This has been Let Me Talk
with Barry Will.
Thank you very much.
Anything you'd like to plug before we go off air?
Yeah. Any plugs? Anything you'd like to mention?
Media,
anything coming up?
Anything coming up? Yeah, we're setting up a campus lardo, which is amazing. Like we're setting up in the union. So if you are struggling, not only if you're struggling, but you want to help out, like you can. It's going to be in the union website soon. So it's one of the ways that we're helping students during the cost of living crisis.
Any dates? Anything?
So it depends on when we get volunteers recruited. But I have got my fingers. I've got literally every finger crossed to say that like we're going to get this in action and we're going to be able to start distributing food in about a week and a half.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has been Let Me Talk. Thank you for hearing us talk, and thank you very much to Barry for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. This was the first show back. We'll see you. This will be uploaded to Spotify. Yep. And we were trying to record this show with a camera that sadly did not work. We got about 39 seconds of footage, and I think that's not even when the show was starting because there was no battery. So, however, we are deciding of creating a clips channel as well, which there will be clips uploaded, and it will be on Spotify for people to listen. Barry, thank you very much. So from Barry, from Callum, and from me, Tom, thank you for listening as always, and good night.